I never thought I'd find myself in this situation. My name is Alex, and for the past 5 years I thought I was happily married to my wife, Jenna. We had what I thought was a solid relationship. We shared a nice suburban home, a couple of dogs, and dreams of starting a family. But gradually, something shifted in our lives, and I began to notice that things weren't what they seemed. It started with little things: Jenna's late nights at work, the sudden need for me time, and the way she pulled away emotionally when I tried to connect. I remember the first time I felt that chill in our home. We were sitting on the couch, both watching a movie, but it felt like we were miles apart. It was as if someone had cranked down the thermostat, and I could sense the warmth of our relationship evaporating. I tried to talk to her about it, but she brushed it off, saying I was just being paranoid. I wanted to believe her. Things escalated when I began to see her texting more frequently. I'd catch her on her phone, her face lit up with that same smile she used to give me. That warmth I once saw directed at me now felt reserved for her phone screen. My gut told me something was wrong, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. After all, Jenna had always been the social one, and maybe she was just reconnecting with old friends. I didn't want to be the jealous husband, but the nagging feeling didn't go away. One day, I decided to look through her messages. I know, it sounds wrong, but intuition can be a powerful motivator. I found a series of texts that made my stomach drop. They were flirty, intimate, and provocative, the kind of messages that would make any partner's heart race with betrayal. The last message I saw was a simple, "Can't wait to see you tonight." My heart sank. It was like a punch to the gut, and every breath I took felt heavier. I confronted her when she got home that evening. Jenna looked startled, her eyes wide as I showed her the messages. I could see the panic set in as she scrambled for an explanation. "It's not what you think. I was just joking around," she pleaded. But her excuses were thin, and the lies dripped off her tongue like honey from a jar, sweet but toxic. I couldn't believe the words she was saying, and it felt like my world was crumbling at my feet. Her defensive behavior made it clear that she was hiding something bigger. I pushed her further, demanding the truth. The anger bubbled up inside me, mixing with an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I watched her squirm, her eyes darting away from mine as she tried to concoct a story that would keep me from leaving. "It was just a fling, Alex. It didn't mean anything," she finally admitted, her voice trembling. Those words hit harder than anything else. A fling. I had given her my heart, my trust, and she had thrown it away like it was nothing. I felt a rush of emotions: anger, heartbreak, betrayal, all crashing over me like a tidal wave. The life we built together suddenly felt like a house of cards, fragile and ready to collapse. In that moment, everything changed. I realized that the love I thought we had was just a mirage, a reflection of what I wanted to believe. I was left standing in the debris of our relationship, feeling lost and hollow. How could I have been so blind? The coldness in our home was no longer just a feeling. It was a reality I had to face. As the night wore on, I could feel the weight of our shattered dreams pressing down on me. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I had to make a decision. The warmth we once shared was gone, and it was time for me to take control of my life. I had a decision to make, and there was no way I was going to let her walk away without consequences. I needed to figure out how to move forward, but I wasn't going to let her off easy. This was just the beginning. The confrontation with Jenna left me in a state of turmoil. I spent the night packing our bedroom, the once comforting space now suffocating. I felt trapped in a prison built from my own trust. I replayed every moment, every smile, every time I had defended her when friends warned me about her late nights and strange behavior. This wasn't just about a text message. It was about betrayal on a scale I never imagined possible. The morning light streamed through the curtains, but it did nothing to brighten my mood. Jenna had left for work, her parting words hanging in the air like a bad odor. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Alex. We can work through this." Those words grated on my nerves. How could she think I would just forgive and forget? A few fleeting moments of pleasure for her had become the crumbling foundation of our lives together. I needed to gather my thoughts and figure out my next move. The idea of revenge had started as a fleeting thought, a whisper at the back of my mind. But as I replayed the events of the previous night, it grew louder and more insistent. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. I had dreams and plans that now felt like they had been burned to ashes, and it was time for her to feel some heat too. Over the next few days, I began to devise a plan. I knew I had to be strategic. I didn't want to act out of raw emotion and make a mistake that I would regret later. I needed evidence, something concrete that would make the reality of her actions undeniable. I started monitoring her behavior closely. I began to track her late nights and those strange meetings she seemed to be having. I took my time, gathering small pieces of what would eventually become a larger puzzle. I discovered that the man she was cheating with was a coworker named Ben. From the snippets I overheard and the texts I found, it was clear they had been seeing each other for months. Jenna was lying to both of us, and the betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. One evening, I made a bold move. I decided to follow her after work. I parked a couple of blocks away from her office and waited, heart racing. When Jenna finally walked out, she was laughing and chatting with a man who was clearly not me. They walked together to a nearby bar, and I felt a mix of emotions swirl inside me: anger, sadness, and a strange sense of empowerment. I snapped a few pictures from my car, the flash of my phone camera hidden in the shadows. Watching her so carefree, so unbothered by the pain she was causing, made my blood boil. I couldn't believe that I had once thought of her as my partner, my soulmate. She was betraying our vows for a few moments of excitement with someone else. I felt a fire ignite within me, and with it came clarity. I devised a plan that I would execute with precision. I would confront her again, but this time with evidence in hand. I would show her the pictures, the proof of her infidelity, and I would make sure she felt the weight of her decisions. There would be no escaping this one. I wanted her to understand that the coldness she had created in our home was a reflection of her own actions. The next day, I set things in motion. I was calm and collected when I arrived home from work. Jenna was already there, and she had that same look on her face, the one that told me she was still trying to spin her web of deception. She greeted me with a forced smile, and I could see the guilt lurking beneath the surface. After dinner, I took a deep breath and laid it all out. I pulled out my phone and showed her the pictures I had taken. I watched as her face turned pale, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Alex, I can explain," she stammered, her voice trembling. "What is there to explain, Jenna? You're out with Ben while pretending everything is fine at home." I spat back, my heart racing. I could see the panic in her eyes as she desperately tried to come up with excuses. I didn't mean for it to happen, I was just feeling lost. "You were so wrapped up in your work and I felt so alone," she cried, tears streaming down her face. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, but I wasn't going to let her emotional manipulation work this time. I had a choice to make. I could either let her lay all the blame on me or confront the truth of who she had become. I chose the latter. I was done being the victim of her lies. I needed to take a stand for myself. I felt a sense of power that I hadn't experienced in weeks, and I was ready to take control of my life again. I knew that the emotional impact of this moment would be profound, but I was prepared. I had moved from mere shock and anger to acceptance and resolution. I wanted my home back, not the cold shell it had become under Jenna's betrayal. I decided then and there that I would not only confront this situation, I would dismantle the life we had built if it meant standing up for myself. The next steps were clear in my mind. I would not allow her to manipulate me any longer. I would show Jenna the consequences of her actions, and in doing so, I would reclaim my life. I was ready to burn down the remnants of our marriage, not literally, but emotionally and metaphorically. I just needed to find the right moment to make it happen. The confrontation with Jenna had been intense, and while it began with the raw emotions of anger and betrayal, it quickly transformed into a catalyst for change. I felt a newfound strength surging through me as I realized that I was no longer the passive husband who would accept half-hearted apologies and empty promises. The way she cried and begged for forgiveness struck me as a desperate attempt to regain control. It was clear to me. She didn't truly understand the gravity of what she'd done. After our explosive confrontation, I took some time for myself. I needed to gather my thoughts and plan my next moves carefully. The emotional upheaval had left me drained, but I felt an urgency to act. I couldn't let her think she could manipulate me into forgiving her so easily. She needed to face the consequences, and I was prepared to make that happen. Over the next few days, I played the role of the dutiful husband. I cooked dinner, took care of the dogs, and even sat with her through a few sitcoms that had once brought us joy. I watched as she tried to put on a brave face, but the tension between us was palpable. It felt like we were both actors in a tragic play, pretending that everything was normal while the reality of our situation loomed over us like a dark cloud. It was during one of those tense evenings that I decided it was time to execute my plan. I had been biding my time, collecting her texts and messages, documenting everything. I printed out the incriminating evidence, the texts with Ben, the pictures I had taken of them together, and even some of her past lies that had surfaced in our conversations. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my narrative and ensuring that she couldn't twist the story in her favor. That evening, I told Jenna I wanted to talk. I made it clear that it was important. Her expression shifted from casual indifference to nervousness, and I could see her mind racing as she anticipated what I had to say. I took a deep breath and sat down across from her at the dining room table. "Jenna, we need to be honest with each other," I began, my voice steady. "I've been thinking a lot about what you did and how it's affected me. I need you to understand the full extent of your actions." She shifted in her seat, her eyes darting away from mine. "Alex, please," she started, but I cut her off. "No more excuses. This isn't about us working through this. This is about you facing the reality of what you've done." I slid the printed messages across the table towards her. "This is what you call nothing." Her face paled as she scanned the texts. Her breathing quickened, and I could see the realization dawning on her. I didn't mean for it to happen," she stammered, but I could see the cracks in her facade. The weight of the evidence was suffocating her with guilt. "Not only did you betray me, but you also deceived me for months. You think I would just sit back and let this slide? You have no idea how cold it's made our home, Jenna." I leaned forward, letting my emotions boil to the surface. "You turned our relationship into a lie." She opened her mouth to respond, but I continued, my voice rising with passion. "I want you to feel what it's like to lose something, just like you made me lose my trust in you. You took my heart and ripped it apart, and now it's time for you to face the consequences." I paused for a moment, letting the silence hang in the air. Jenna looked like a deer caught in headlights. I watched as the realization of her actions hit her hard. I was no longer the victim. I was taking control of my own narrative. "I've decided to file for divorce," I stated, my voice steady and firm. "This isn't something we can work through. The trust is gone, and it doesn't come back from this." Her reaction was instantaneous. "No, Alex, please don't do this. We can fix it," she pleaded, her voice rising in desperation. I shook my head, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. This was the end of our chapter, and I was resolute. "You had your chance, and you threw it away. I'm done fighting for a marriage that you've already destroyed." As Jenna continued to plead, I saw her desperation turn to anger. "You're being ridiculous. You're throwing everything away for a mistake," she shouted, her voice tinged with bitterness. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. "A mistake? You made a choice, Jenna. You chose him over me. This isn't just a mistake. It's a betrayal that has shattered everything we built together." The tears streamed down her face, and for a moment I felt an ounce of sympathy for her. But I quickly buried it. Under the resolve I had built over the past few days, I had suffered long enough, and it was time for me to reclaim my life. "I'll have the papers ready soon. You can get a lawyer if you want, but I won't change my mind," I said, getting up from the table. I felt a strange sense of liberation as I walked away from her, leaving her in the silence of our broken home. In that moment, I had chosen myself over the coldness she had created. I was ready to embrace the next chapter of my life, one where I would no longer be shackled by betrayal. It was time to burn the remnants of our marriage, to let go of the past and move toward a future free from the weight of her lies. I felt empowered, ready to take on whatever came next. The aftermath of my decision to confront Jenna was like a whirlwind. The initial shock of our confrontation faded, but the emotional storm within me raged on. I had made the choice to file for divorce, and while it felt empowering, there was still a heaviness in the air. Our home, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and desolate, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. After that night, Jenna and I avoided each other as much as possible. I kept my distance, spending most of my time in the home office or out with friends. I felt an odd mix of freedom and grief. I was free from the chains of betrayal, but I was also mourning the loss of the relationship I had cherished. I took long walks with our dogs, allowing the fresh air to clear my mind. My friends were supportive, but they didn't fully understand the weight of what I was going through. Jenna, on the other hand, seemed desperate. She would reach out, trying to engage in conversations about our future, but I kept my responses short and to the point. "I'm filing for divorce," I would say, each word punctuating the finality of my decision. Her attempts to get me to reconsider only fueled my resolve. It wasn't long before she started moving her things out. I watched as she packed up her belongings, each box symbolizing a piece of our life that was being dismantled. The reality of our situation hit me hard. I would no longer see her face every morning or share random moments of laughter throughout the day. We were transitioning from partners to strangers, and it felt like a slow-motion train wreck. As the days turned into weeks, I focused on preparing for the next steps in my life. I secured a lawyer and began the legal process of divorce, which felt daunting but necessary. The paperwork felt like a bitter pill to swallow, but it was a step toward reclaiming my life. I was ready to move on, but I still needed closure from Jenna. One weekend, I returned home from a friend's house to find her in the living room, surrounded by boxes and a few remnants of our life together. She looked up at me with a mix of sadness and defiance. "I can't believe it's come to this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, crossing my arms. "Neither can I, but you made your choices, Jenna. You need to understand that there are consequences." She stood up, tears brimming in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was just so unhappy I thought I could find something missing in our relationship elsewhere." Hearing her say that stung, but I couldn't let myself be pulled back into the emotional web she was weaving. "You should have talked to me instead of seeking comfort in another man. This isn't something we can reconcile. You chose this path." She opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my hand to stop her. "I've made my decision. I'm moving forward without you. It's time for both of us to find our own happiness." The silence hung heavily in the air. I could see the realization settling in her eyes. This was it. No more chances, no more pretending. I turned to leave when she called out to me, her voice shaking. "Alex, please don't think I don't care. I just didn't know how to handle everything." I stopped in my tracks, feeling a pang of sympathy. "You made a choice, Jenna. You need to own it. I can't carry that burden for you." With that, I walked out of the room, feeling the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. As the weeks went by, I poured myself into my work and hobbies. I began to rediscover who I was outside of the marriage. I took up running, something I had abandoned when I got busy with life. I found solace in the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement, the burn in my legs reminding me that I was alive and capable of moving forward. I also began to focus on self-improvement. I started reading more, exploring new interests, and hanging out with friends who had been a source of support during this tumultuous time. Felt liberating to reclaim my identity, and with each passing day, I felt the hold Jenna had on my life loosening. But even as I moved forward, the legal proceedings loomed over me. The thought of a courtroom and all the discussions that would take place filled me with anxiety. I knew that the divorce would be complicated, especially with the emotional baggage involved. But I was resolved to see it through. I would not let her betrayal define me any longer. Then came the day of our first mediation meeting. I walked into the conference room, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. I took a seat, mentally preparing myself for whatever was about to unfold. When Jenna entered, I could see that she was nervous too, but I also noticed a glimmer of defiance in her eyes. The mediator started the meeting, and as we discussed the terms of the divorce, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I was reclaiming my life, piece by piece, and it felt empowering to know that I was taking control of my future. As we navigated the discussions, Jenna tried to negotiate terms that seemed unreasonable, often leaning on emotional appeals to sway me. But I held firm, reminding myself of the betrayal that had brought us to this point. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that we were both on separate paths, our lives diverging in ways I never thought possible. The mediation felt like a turning point, a chance for me to finally step away from the coldness that had engulfed our home. I realized then that I was ready to leave behind not only Jenna, but also the memories of a relationship that no longer served me. With each step I took away from that conference room, I felt lighter, as if I were shedding a heavy coat that had weighed me down for far too long. The divorce was still ongoing, but I no longer felt overwhelmed. I was reclaiming my narrative and stepping boldly into a new chapter of my life. I had learned that even in the face of betrayal, it was possible to rise from the ashes. I was ready to forge ahead, ready to find warmth once more, but this time it would be on my terms. As the divorce proceedings continued, I felt a gradual shift in my mindset. I went from being a man shattered by betrayal to one who was reclaiming his life. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I still felt the sting of Jenna's actions, but I was determined to build a better future. The mediation sessions became more bearable, even as the tension between Jenna and me simmered beneath the surface. I found myself leaning into my newfound independence. I started going out more, reconnecting with friends, and even exploring new interests, like cooking classes and hiking trips. It felt like I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried for years under the weight of our crumbling marriage. One evening, after a long day at work, I decided to treat myself to dinner at a local restaurant. Sitting at the bar, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Sarah. She was vibrant and engaging, and there was an instant connection between us. We talked about everything from our favorite books to our shared love for travel. For the first time in a while, I felt a spark of joy that I thought had been extinguished. As the weeks passed, Sarah and I continued to see each other. Dinner dates turned into weekend hikes, and we both shared a lightness that came from being genuinely interested in one another. I was cautious, of course. The emotional scars from my marriage still loomed large, but with Sarah, I felt a sense of hope that I hadn't realized I was missing. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings progressed. Jenna and I continued to communicate primarily through our lawyers, which made things less emotionally charged. I found solace in the idea that I was putting distance between myself and the pain she caused. But even as I moved on, I knew I couldn't avoid the finality of the situation forever. The day of the final divorce hearing arrived, and I felt a mix of anxiety and relief. I wore a tailored suit that made me feel confident, and I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. Jenna was already there, her expression unreadable. I took a deep breath and prepared myself for what was about to unfold. As the hearing progressed, I listened to the judge review our case, and I felt a strange sense of closure wash over me. We presented our sides, and while there were still moments of tension, I remained composed. I focused on the future rather than dwelling on the past. When the judge declared our marriage officially dissolved, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. There was sorrow for what had been lost, but there was also liberation. I was free, free to pursue my happiness, free to live without the coldness that had overtaken my life for so long. After the hearing, I stepped outside into the crisp air and took a moment to collect myself. I felt like a weight had been lifted, as if I could finally breathe again. I reached for my phone and texted Sarah to share the news. Her cheerful response brought a smile to my face, and I realized that I was beginning to see a future filled with possibilities. In the days that followed, I embraced my new reality. I spent time with Sarah, enjoying the easy laughter and connection we shared. She was a breath of fresh air, and while I remained cautious, I felt more open to letting someone back into my life. But there were still moments of reflection about my past, and I knew that I needed to confront those feelings head-on. I took some time to journal, writing about my experiences and the lessons I had learned throughout the tumultuous process. I wrote about betrayal, heartbreak, and the journey of self-discovery that had unfolded in the wake of my marriage. I found clarity in those reflections. I realized that while Jenna had caused me immense pain, she had also inadvertently forced me to confront my own identity. I had learned to stand up for myself, to recognize my worth, and to embrace the idea that my happiness was not contingent on anyone else. One evening, while sitting with Sarah in a cozy cafe, I shared some of my journey. I opened up about my past, my struggles, with trust and how I was learning to let go of the baggage that had held me back. She listened attentively, her eyes filled with understanding. "I admire your strength, Alex," she said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "It takes a lot to confront the past and still keep moving forward. You should be proud of yourself." Her kindness and empathy warmed my heart. I realized that while the road to healing was still ongoing, I had finally found someone who appreciated me for who I was, scars and all. I felt hopeful, and for the first time in a long while, I could envision a future filled with love and connection. But I also made a promise to myself. I wouldn't rush into anything. I'd take the time to heal, to grow, and to learn from my experiences. I wouldn't let the coldness I once felt seep back into my life. As summer approached and the days grew longer, I embraced the change in seasons as a metaphor for my own transformation. I was no longer the man tied to a painful past. I was rebuilding my life, one step at a time, and I was ready to welcome whatever came next with open arms. The journey of healing was far from over, but I was no longer afraid. I was ready to face the world and all its unexpected twists and turns, knowing that I had emerged stronger on the other side. My heart was beginning to thaw, and the warmth of new beginnings was finally on the horizon. As the summer sun warmed my skin, I found myself embracing life with a newfound perspective. The past few months had been a whirlwind, but I was beginning to feel grounded again. The divorce was finalized, and while it brought a sense of relief, it also marked a turning point in my life. I was no longer defined by my relationship with Jenna. Instead, I was becoming my own person, someone who was capable of healing and finding happiness again. Sarah and I grew closer, and our connection deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. We spent weekends exploring local hiking trails, dining at different restaurants, and even taking short road trips to nearby towns. I felt alive and free, as if I were rediscovering the world through fresh eyes. I vividly remember one afternoon sitting on a picnic blanket beneath the shade of a large oak tree. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting playful patterns on our faces. We laughed as we shared sandwiches and talked about our dreams. It was during that moment that I realized how far I had come. I was no longer the man consumed by heartache. I was a man ready to embrace the uncertainties of life. "Alex, can I ask you something?" Sarah said, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the sun. "Of course," I replied, intrigued. "What has been the biggest lesson you've learned from your past relationship?" she asked, her tone genuine. I paused, reflecting on the journey that had led me here. "I think the biggest lesson is about knowing my worth. I allowed myself to believe that I needed to make sacrifices to keep someone happy, even at the expense of my own happiness. I've learned that I deserve to be with someone who values me completely." Sarah smiled, and a warmth spread through my chest. "That's so important. We all deserve to be in relationships that lift us up, not tear us down." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that my past would always be a part of me, but it no longer held power over my present. I was moving forward, and that realization filled me with hope. Summer turned into fall, and as the leaves changed colors, so did my outlook on life. I continued to nurture my relationship with Sarah, and I also took the time to focus on myself. I started volunteering at a local shelter, which not only helped others but also filled my heart with purpose. I found joy in giving back, and it reminded me that life was about connection and community. One day, while volunteering, I met a young woman named Lisa, who had recently gone through a difficult breakup. She was struggling to find her footing, and I recognized the pain in her eyes. I shared my story with her, not to dwell on the past, but to show her that healing was possible. As we talked, I could see the flicker of hope ignite within her. "Thank you for sharing your story, Alex. It gives me hope," she said, her voice trembling. I smiled, realizing that through my own struggles, I had gained the ability to help others. It felt empowering to support someone who was facing the same challenges I once did. I knew that healing was a journey unique to each person, but sharing my experiences allowed me to turn my pain into strength. As winter approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had transpired. Jenna's betrayal had been a rude awakening, but it had also propelled me into a journey of self-discovery and resilience. I had faced the darkest moments of my life and emerged on the other side, ready to embrace love again, this time with open eyes and an open heart. Sarah and I officially made our relationship exclusive as the holidays approached. We spent time getting to know each other's families, and I felt a warmth that had been missing for so long. We shared laughter, joy, and the kind of intimacy that came from truly understanding one another's pasts. It felt different, healthier, more genuine, and rooted in respect. On New Year's Eve, as we stood together watching fireworks light up the night sky, I felt a sense of hope for the future. The vibrant explosions mirrored the excitement bubbling within me. "Happy New Year, Alex," Sarah exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Happy New Year, Sarah. Here's to new beginnings," I replied, raising my glass in a toast. In that moment, amidst the celebration and warmth of those around us, I understood that while the scars of my past would always be a part of me, they no longer defined my worth or my future. I had learned to forgive, not only Jenna but also myself for the choices I had made. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I was stronger than I had ever been. As the clock struck midnight, I kissed Sarah, feeling alive and full of promise. We stood together, two individuals who had faced their own battles and had emerged with newfound strength. I was no longer the victim of betrayal. I was a survivor, a man ready to embrace life's adventures. Walking into the new year, I carried with me the lessons of the past, the warmth of new love, and a heart open to all possibilities. I was ready to live fully, to love deeply, and to cherish every moment. The coldness that once enveloped my life had melted away, and I was finally home.